Hi there, I hope you're well. In this video, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the next generation of the 10-minute workshop Loose Tenon Jig, the Loose Tenon Jig 30. If you don't know the backstory, I did a video about a DIY Loose Tenon Jig a couple of years ago. It took about 6 months to wrestle a flat pack CNC version of that jig into production, and a second, larger or plus version of that jig followed about a year after that. This new version combines the simple functionality of the original jig together with the shelf pin goodness of the plus jig, but in a new material and using a more readily available 30mm guide bush, hence the new name, the LTJ30. Like the previous versions, the LTJ30 is a two-piece flat pack router jig made specifically to put loose tenon mortises in the face and edges of 18mm thick boards to make simple carcasses, cabinets, wardrobe, bookshelves and the like. And it remains, to the best of my knowledge, the only loose tenon jig that lets you put a narrow mortise in the edge of a board and a wider one in the face without adjusting a stop on the jig or moving the jig himself. And it's this wiggle room that allows you to work precisely but loosely. The new material that this jig is made from means that it arrives as a complete product. There's no customer interaction required other than to put the two halves together with the supplied machine screws. This video is literally all the assembly guide you need. But rather than listen to me prattle on about it, I'm just going to use the jig to put a basic cabinet, a simple carcass together, and I'll fill you in on some of the details as we go. So as you saw, the jig comes flat packed in two parts that are simply assembled into an L shape and secured together with the supplied machine screws. Each jig comes with a couple of pairs of 5mm reference pins, with a longer pair intended for the edge reference. We'll get to the shorter pair later. I fitted a standard 30mm guide bush to the router and centered it with a mandrel, then fitted a 5mm spiral upcut bit. There's one included in the optional starter kit, more on that later. And I've set the plunge depth for the 30mm dominoes using the notch in the end of the jig. I've marked out on the cabinet where I want the loose tenons to go, and unusually for this cabinet I'll be working off pencil marks mostly because the top and base extend beyond the sides. It's just the front face that I'll be using the reference pins for. I'm starting with the wider mortises on the inside face of the cabinet. The larger face of the jig has wider slots, and just letting the reference pins set the position against the workpiece edge. A couple of clamps and I can cut the first mortise, and then the second, this time working off the pencil marks. And then the mid-panel slot, lining up the scribed centerline on the jig with the pencil marks once more. And then I can repeat the process on the other end of this side, and I'll complete the other cabinet side in the same way off camera. Top and base next, and I'm using the small face of the jig to cut a tight mortise in the edges, again just using the reference pins against the front edge to give me the position. No measuring or marking on this one. And then the centre and rear mortises, again lined up with the pencil marks that we made earlier. I'm not putting a shelf into this carcass, but if you did want, say, a fixed centre shelf or a mid-panel fixing, then the jig can be lined up with the edges using the reference pins, and for the centre fixing you can simply screw the jig down. Those holes will be hidden when the panel's in place. So for shelf pin holes, I recommend using a 4.76mm bit. There's one included in the Starter Pack Plus. And if you just want a simple center shelf pin hole with one above and below, then you can just flip the jig over fully assembled, line the edge of the jig against the carcass for the perfect 37mm setback, center it vertically with a notch on the edge of the jig, and then bore your holes. I'd recommend using the jig against a fence or a batten to keep the vertical position consistent from side to side though. If you want a longer row of shelf pin holes, then you can extend that using the reference pins and the supplied hole. The short pins will sit flush in the counterbore if you split the jig into its two halves. I do recommend clamping the jig down. There's something I didn't do this time. Okay, that's all the machining done, not looking too bad. I'm going to slap this together quickly with a bit of glue and some 5x30 dominoes, and while I do that, let me answer a few of the more obvious questions. So why 5x30mm dominoes? Well, first of all, don't make a 6x30. 30mm dominoes are great to use because it's the same 15mm plunge depth for the face and edge mortises in 18mm material. First of all, make it really easy to change the plunge depth on the domino. So using, say, a 6x40mm domino, you can switch between a 15mm plunge on the face and a 25mm plunge on the edge. But even so, I've managed to get it wrong enough times that I just switched to using 5x30s, and I've built literally thousands of carcasses that way without any issues whatsoever. It's also much harder to switch between plunge depths with a router. You'd have to preset it on the turret, and even then you may not have enough plunge depth on your router, especially if you're using one of the smaller palm routers. Worth mentioning though that the folks at Trend UK have started doing a range of own brand loose tenons, and they do make a 6x30mm loose tenon at my suggestion that I do have a bag of, so I'll be taking a look at those when I get closer to the end of my stock of 5x30, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. Another question is, will the jig work on thinner stock? Yes, though the jig is set up for 18mm thick material, you can use it on 15mm or 12mm stock by using shims or packers on the inside face. Again though, you may run into niggles with the dominoes and plunge depth on smaller routers, so just watch out for that. And final question, will it work on thicker stock? Yes, but the dominoes won't be centered. On the Festool domino, one of the main gripes initially was the lack of an 18mm setting on the fence. Most folks, including me, just used the 20mm setting, and it worked just fine with a slightly offset domino, so you'll have no issues with 22mm or 25mm thick stock. If you end up getting something thicker like 32mm or more, then maybe consider the double domino approach, where you put one in from each face. That's not looking too bad. It's all clamped up very nicely and gone together very well, nice and tight on the edges, which is what you want. So I think we can call that one a success. So that's the latest generation loose tenon jig, the LTJ30 in action. It does replace the previous jigs, the original and the plus, as they're just not practical to make in this new material, and unfortunately the birch ply supply issues don't appear to be going away, certainly not anytime soon. As you can imagine, there have been some increases in production costs with this too. Most things have gone up over the last year, but I've taken those on the chin myself to hold the price of the LTJ30 at £85, the same as the old plus jig, with options like the starter pack and starter pack plus available at additional cost. The first batch of the LTJ30 is mostly sold. Channel members and newsletter subscribers get first dibs on those, but the next batch will be available for pre-order soon, and I expect those to be shipping in a few weeks' time. There's more details at 10minute.shop or on the merchant shelf immediately below this video if all the stars have aligned. Of course, you're always welcome to join the newsletter mailing list at 10minuteworkshop.email to stay in the loop, or to join us as a 10 Minute Workshop Plus member if you'd like to have a hand in shaping the next 10 Minute Workshop products. There's more details at 10minuteworkshop.com, or you can sign up directly at 10minuteworkshop.plus. I would love to have you on board and taking part, but I'll call this one done for this week. Thanks ever so much for taking a look, and I'll see you again very soon. All right, take care.